What's going on, guys? It's Bromley from Empire Barbell. Today we're going to go over some deadlift accessory discussion. Specifically, I want to talk about Romanian deadlifts and stiff leg deadlifts and the difference between the two. They get conflated a lot, so I want to talk about the difference between the two and specifically where they would be recommended in your training. Many of you have heard of Romanians before. Many of you have even done them or thought you were doing them. They're one of my favorite accessory exercises for deads. In fact, if any of you have worked with me, you know that I tend to routinely program them in during volume phases because it is harder to do high volume deadlifting, specifically if you're trying to do high volume squatting as well. It's hard to do both those things at the same time. So one of the reasons I like Romanians is because it does a ton to develop and round out your deadlift while also being a little bit more trainable. It doesn't tear you down as much. Recovery tends to be a lot easier. So it checks a lot of boxes. So we'll start with a discussion of Romanian, then I'll talk about stiff legs and talk about what's important. For Romanian specifically, the key thing is that you are not allowing any change in your posture whatsoever. From the hip all the way up to the shoulder, you set yourself at neutral. You keep yourself that way the whole way down. For all of the discussion I've done over bracing and posture and positioning and injury prevention, you can see that that's why it's one of my favorite lifts, because it reinforces good posture. When we're doing really heavy deadlifts, we might allow a little bit of give. Specifically when we do stiff leg deadlifts, there's actually some rounding inherent in that movement. But for the purposes of a Romanian, you're practicing on bracing, keeping the shoulders back and locked in, keeping the abdominals tight, and allowing yourself to get in position while emphasizing that brace. So that's one. Thing two is that a Romanian deadlift doesn't go to the ground. A Romanian deadlift is floated. So if you've ever seen videos of some of the better Olympic lifters doing Romanian deadlifts on a box, they stand up on a box because they're so flexible, they can go through this extreme stretch. You notice that they do not change position in their lumbar spine or in their hips, and that they can take it down, float the bar an inch off the ground, and come back up to where the bar is almost on their toes. Now that is a gold standard I wish all of us could achieve, but very few of us can. In fact, I have a hard time getting mid-shin when it comes to executing a Romanian with any type of weight or intensity. But we all work with what we have. So it doesn't go to the ground. So if you've ever seen somebody taking a deadlift to the ground and then reversing direction, there's a context of Romanians that it doesn't go to the ground. And it also, that action also reinforces the bracing, because you'll find it's much harder to keep that brace as you change direction without letting it rest on the ground first. So that is definitely an important developmental point. The other point that people normally don't talk about is that the knee actually stays bent the whole time. So you'll see a lot of people execute something that looks like a Romanian and then come up and stand up. And it's not necessarily that that's incorrect, but one tenet that doesn't get discussed a lot is the knee actually stays bent. So as you push the hips back, you're maintaining position, and as you reverse direction, keeping the knees bent forces you to rock your hips in independently of the knee locking out. Now, that might have its own implications for Olympic weightlifting. I love it as deadlift practice because so many people have a horrible habit of coming up on their heavy pulls and locking their knees out prematurely, which just destroys their leverages. Your knees are locked out, so now your hamstring is fully stretched. The bar is now out in front of you, and it is pretty much exclusively on your hamstrings to finish the lockout in that very disadvantaged position. So all deadlifters should have some sense of how to get the bar above their knee while their knee is still very slightly bent, because it will make your lockout just way, way more efficient. I mean, by the time you get the bar above your knees, the lift should be over. So if you're right here where the knee's slightly bent and you can extend the knee and hip at the same time, you're gonna be very strong. If the knee kicks back and it's all hips while the bar is at or below your knee, you're gonna have a real hard time locking out your pulls. So this reinforces that as well. So all of those things go into making Romanian what it is. The reason I like it, aside from the bracing component, is that it takes something relatively complex like a deadlift and reduces it down to its most basic developmental components. So where most of you will do your deadlifts, where you'll stand up, it's this big monumental push to get tension, to get tight, 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 stand up, and then crash it to the ground, and then get tight, reset, push. So each rep and each set is really marked by that very aggressive intent to get tight, which is what you need at the start of a heavy deadlift. And then the push is all of the momentum and power you generate from that starting position. The Romanian puts all the pressure on how you are throughout the entire range of the lift, with staying under control, keeping tension on the main movers, glutes and hamstrings, and the muscles of your midsection. And it makes it a very simple stroke. Many of you that have dabbled in bodybuilding know that For each movement, whether it's a compound movement or an isolation movement, there's like a range they tend to work in where they find it to be the most effective developmentally. Whether it's just working in the mid-range of a bicep curl where it's not all the way stretched or all the way contracted. And they do that for compound lifts as well. They find the sweet spot that puts the stress at the spot they're trying to grow. So a Romanian deadlift has an element of that smoothness where you can move fluidly in the sweet spot, and you're gonna get a ton of development in your glutes and hamstrings as a result, because it is not so, the entire set isn't so scattered. So to be able to have that kind of developmental power in a movement that so closely resembles your competitive setup, that's very rare and it's very valuable, which is why a lot of you people, it's why a lot of you guys watching this should be going out of your way to implement this in your own training. It increases bracing, it increases flexibility where you need it, it increases your receptivity of the movement, it gets you dialed in with how your hips hinge, it builds your glutes and hamstrings better. It allows you to recover better while also doing other modes of heavy lifting. I mean, top to bottom, Romanians are just a great exercise that provide a ton of bang and don't tend to be as complicated to program. I recommend these for a little higher reps than I normally recommend deads because they're easier to recover from. You can get a lot of good quality volume work from these without blowing your wad for everything else. So 8s and 10s are great. When you start getting heavier towards the end of a cycle, you can use them as a secondary exercise, and you can actually get a heavy 3, 4, 5 reps on a Romanian once you're comfortable with them. But remember, bracing is key, okay? Keep it fluid and under control, and go through a full range of motion. So demonstrating a Romanian, setting into position, doesn't really matter how you start, okay? Shoulders are back, posture set, hips are neutral, ribs are down, I'm braced, I'm squeezing, knees are slightly bent, I'm pushing my butt back while keeping that hip position. I already feel my abs squeezing. Knees are staying back, 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 back. I'm braced, I'm tight, I'm under control, keeping the knees bent. I reverse direction and bring my hips through. And once you get comfortable, you see how smooth and even the work is. And especially for reps and volume, it's just fantastic for getting your whole backside overhauled. It's gonna add all of the meat you need on the main movers that you might be bypassing by just attaching yourself to heavy deads. So moving on to stiff leg deadlifts, really the only technical qualification of a stiff leg deadlift is you don't do any knee extension. If you're like me and you deadlift with a lot of leg drive, you start with a fair amount of knee flexion. So I actually start as I push through the ground as I deadlift. To do a stiff leg, I have to have my butt way, way higher, my knees push back, because the idea is I'm not involving any knee extension at all. Now, one of the implications of that is that your posture is not going to be dialed in. Most people aren't flexible enough to get out a real stiff leg deadlift without allowing some give in their back. Now, there's this margin we work in, especially with accessory work, where a little bit is okay as long as we know that that's what we're doing. And actually, that in and of itself can add a little bit of extra to your bracing regimen by getting you comfortable bracing outside of position. But it's very important that you're aware that you know where you're at, that you know you're outside of position. In strongman, we do things like odd object picks, stone loads, bag picks, where we have to get over something and extend. And it's great for developing back strength. But I know that that's not the position I'm going to be in when I'm trying to attempt maximal squats and deadlifts. So you have to know where your correct position is. So one benefit of stiff leg deads is that it takes you out of that position, forces you to brace and get tight when your spine is disadvantaged, your leverages are disadvantaged. Because your hips are high, you're also going to start with your hamstrings and glutes stretched, which disadvantages them. Similar effect to what you're going to get from a deficit deadlift. So yes, a little bit more of a training effect from being disadvantaged. So what you're going to be doing ultimately is conditioning your body to pull in this disadvantaged position, which is going to put a premium again on the main movers. Your hams and glutes just have to work harder. And actually the muscles, your erectors, midsection, upper back, also have to work harder. They are all disadvantaged. So there's an idea that if you improve your stiff leg deadlift, you're going to be that much better when you go into a more advantaged, more efficient setup. When you get tight, set your brace in, and actually use your legs to get the bar off the ground. Now the thing about a stiff leg deadlift is it follows the same pattern as a normal deadlift where you're going to the ground, resetting and picking again. So it has a little bit of an extra layer of difficulty as far as recoverability goes than maybe a Romanian deadlift does. Hard stiff-legged deadlifts I don't think are going to be quite as taxing as regular deads because the weight just isn't going to be as heavy. So your nervous system isn't going to quite be as burnt out, especially if you're new to these. More novel movements, you tend to be able to train a lot more frequently. So recoverability is going to be a little better than deadlifts. I think it's going to be substantially harder than Romanians, but that probably depends on how hard you push it. Knees don't have to be locked. That's a big one, okay? Don't try to do a stiff leg deadlift with your knees hyperextended, because that will be a bad time. So knees need to be back, very, very slight bend in your knees. The idea is to keep your hips high. You still want to aim for brace. You don't want to round shamelessly. And it takes me a little bit to get in a good position where I feel comfortable. Okay, knees are back, butt's high. From right here, without dropping my butt, I am pulling tension into the bar, so my butt is high and back. I'm bracing, and I feel how I was like a crane. All of the movement came from my hips. So on the surface, they might not look that different, but the subtle differences, the nuances between these two movements are going to be important when figuring out where you put them in your training cycle because of their recoverability. Stiff leg deadlifts are a good option if you're looking to get hard work in without blowing yourself out. So let's say you're on a split where you're trying to do like a harder day and lighter day, both in the same week. The lighter day or the easier day might be stiff leg deadlifts because you can still push the weight, but it doesn't have the same systemic effect as deadlifting. So it might be a way to get extra work in. Romanians, I only recommend going heavier on when you are comfortable with that movement, because flexibility is a limiting factor. There's a lot of different things you have to get down before you can really feel comfortable pushing it. But in the meantime, I heard it directly from Ode Haugen. We were talking about Martin's deadlifting ability, Martin's Lisa's. And Ode Haugen's exact words, he's like, I think it's all the RDLs he does, because he always squats and then immediately after he does a bunch of RDLs, very slow, very controlled, and he shows it when he pulls. He's not a reckless deadlifter. He's very deliberate. He looks like he's comfortable in that position, and it looks like he's practiced that over and over and over, and the RDLs are undoubtedly something that has contributed to that. So these are both great movements. They can go in on your lower body days. They can even go in on a lighter deadlift day, maybe follow it up with like upper back work. There's a bunch of different ways you can put them in, and you could periodize them the exact same way that you do a deadlift. You can start with more sets, more reps, lighter weight, and then as you get comfortable and you build up, you get comfortable handling heavier and heavier attempts at lower and lower reps, and you're gonna find that as you build proficiency with these movements, your deadlift's gonna get rounded up. I don't recommend doing them both at the same time. They both disadvantage you in a similar way. I would pick one or the other. I'm not a huge fan of picking movements specifically for weaknesses. Most of you just need to brush up on the movements and work on being more technical and sticking to your program. But if we are gonna pick apart where they would be best indicated for a more advanced lifter, if somebody has trouble, I would say mid-shin, the point after your legs drive into the bar, but before you get above the knee, that tends to be where the load gets shifted into your hamstrings. So a stiff-legged deadlift, because you'll be able to get a little bit heavier right off the bat, I think would be better indicated for something like that, where you have a weakness mid-shin, where there would be probably different recommendations specifically for lockout or specifically for power off the ground. For most of you, it's going to be best suited as just variety for the sake of variety. So remember that. It's good to every few blocks rotate in a new movement just to keep yourself well-rounded. You don't need to specialize in the same movement all the time. Do it long enough to get good at it. Don't do it so long that you become a specialist at it. Romanian deadlifts, again, bracing. I just love it for learning how to keep your shoulders back, keep everything locked in. I love it for learning how to stay tight under a load. If you have a problem with rounding at the back, hit your Romanian deadlifts. If you feel like either your glutes or hamstrings are underdeveloped. I mean, a lot of people who are quad dominant because they're good squatters. If you just need mass on the backside of your body, Romanians for volume are an easy one. Like I said, it won't interfere with your other modes of training. So both of them can be put in routinely as deadlift accessory. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave it in the comment box or start a thread on the forum, empire-forum.com. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley at Empire Barbell. I'll see you.